Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge, direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
Are you ready to take your medical device development to the next level? Greenlight Guru is the leading QMS software built exclusively for the MedTech industry. With Greenlight Guru, you'll stay compliant with global regulations while accelerating innovation and time to market. No more paper trails or complex spreadsheets, just a single source of truth to manage your entire product lifecycle. Join the growing list of MedTech professionals who've made compliance easier and faster with Greenlight Guru. Learn more at www.greenlight.guru. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. Today I want to talk to you about our medical device industry report. With me to kind of give almost, I guess, be my sounding board is Sarah Adams, a medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru. Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Always exciting and a pleasure.
Yes, I always appreciate you coming on, even if I have to twist your arm to come on the podcast. People love hearing your voice, and I always enjoy getting to have conversation with you on the industry.
The behind the scenes is Etienne has to twist my arm into doing podcasts.
But we don't have to tell people that. They know you love the industry, so that's good enough, I think.
I do. I love the industry. I love helping the industry. So I'm excited to dive into today's topic.
Well, to give a little bit of background, what we're going to be talking about is Greenlight Guru's 2025 Medical Device Industry Report. I've got it here in front of me. The subtitle is Quality Challenges, Regulatory Complexity, and Economic Uncertainty, I guess I should say, and which kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to be covering. The goal is to help companies understand 2025, some of the evolving market landscapes, help to plan for the future and some of the challenges that they're going to be facing. This industry report is something we do every year at Greenlight Guru, and we try to interview as many as we can. This year, we interviewed or surveyed 536 quality, product development, clinical, and regulatory and leadership professionals in the medical device industry. It was during October, November of 2024. So part of the reason I bring up that date is because a lot of things have changed since then. A lot of things are going to be the same. And I don't know, we could talk about all the different things that have changed, and we'll touch on that. But Sarah, what's top of mind for you right now as you kind of go through this?
Well, I think even with the October-November timeframe, there were lots of uncertainties about what was going to happen in general. So I think that we should consider that as we look at these two. While lots has changed since then, there were lots of conversations about what could change, and obviously lots of opinions at that point in time too.
Yeah. And just to lay our cards on the table, the things that have changed between now and then, the U.S. has had a change in presidential administration, which has changed quite a bit of its approach to different things, including the health and human services. Some of the staff and budget pressures that were put on the HHS and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, early this year in 2025. So those all are going to add to the uncertainty. So I don't know that it will change any of this report more than solidify some of the things that we've learned. I don't know what your thoughts.
No, I completely agree with you on that.
But let's start kind of the top line. When I looked at this report, and by the way, if you're interested in getting the full report, we'll put a link in the show notes. We'll try to maybe direct where you can look at this and download it. It's always a beautiful report. I mean, it's a great printout and a lot of good graphs. I'm a sucker for a good graph. But when we start this report out, it talks about how the medical device industry is projected to continue its growth in 2025. And we actually got data from KPMG that predicts that global annual sales are expected to rise by 5% per year to reach around 800 billion in 2030. So that's great. It's good to see that favorable rise. You work with medical device companies every day, Sarah. What have you seen as far as a boots on the ground approach? Are there things that are really stand out to you? I don't know how many companies you work with at a time, but
I work with lots of companies at a time. It varies. It's different. I work with all of our customers here at Greenlight. So that includes, pre-market, post-market, and everything in between. I think what stands out, for this number, and maybe this is a little more personal than it is my day-to-day at Greenlight. I have aging parents. They're not going to listen to this podcast, but they might. But either way, I have aging parents. And so I think like what I see in my day-to-day is a lot of really smart people who are looking to disrupt the health, I'll say, industry in really big ways for that aging population. So like my parents are boomers, we'll just call them that. And there's a reason that's what that generation is called. There's just a lot of them. And so when you get really smart people who are looking to disrupt that industry and bring cutting edge, life-changing devices to market, yeah, I'm not surprised that we're on the up and up as far as sales and the industry numbers.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really good point. Next week, I'm planning to go to the LSI USA at Dana Point, California, and I'll be interviewing a few family office investors. And this is something that is relatively new to me. It's not new by any means, but it seems to be more and more prevalent that family offices are the ones funding a lot of the medical device companies out there. In
Mhm.
fact, one of the companies that I interviewed in Portugal at another event, they managed to bring their medical device fully to I was just shy of being on the market, and they were purchased by a strategic. They were fully funded through family office, which is kind
Oh,
of
wow.
it was unusual to me to hear that, but
Mhm.
that's and it makes sense with the aging population and the amount of businesses that are owned by that generation.
Yeah.
It's that money has to go somewhere, and a lot of it is philanthropic driven. So I think that's really interesting that you pointed that out. Okay, let's get into a little bit of I don't some of the things that stood out to me in the report. And I would welcome you to interrupt or challenge any of the things that I say, but some of the things that really stood out to me were the amount of new hires that was being halted. So large companies, we asked the company about their development and their hiring in 2025. And large companies were more likely to say they're halting new hires, about 46%, and reducing headcount. About 41% said they were reducing headcount. Analysts at KPMG they kind of explain this by saying the medical device sector is facing challenges such as healthcare budget restrictions, new reimbursement regimes that are impacting margins, and disruption from new players entering the market. So that sounds kind of counter to what we were saying earlier
Yeah.
about increased sales, increased market presence. Why are they reducing headcount? And of course, some of this may be speculation, but I was curious if you had any thoughts on this before we kind of get too
I
far.
I think everything I have on this subject is speculation, right? So, I mean, I go back to October, November, there were a lot of unknowns. There was definitely a new president coming in America. Who knows, at that point in time, which one it was going to be. So there was room for economic policy that was going to change. And so I think like there's some hesitancy, or there was some hesitancy likely when this report was completed, not when it was compiled, but when we surveyed, just of unknowns of like, I don't know what that is going to look like as we step into the new year and the new scene as far as politics is concerned. And obviously, we're not here to talk about politics today, but I think like there was just some uncertainty that even with rising numbers, like how do we navigate this? Speaking freely about what has transpired, I think maybe that there was some wisdom in that of like, hey, let's just kind of wait and see what happens. I think a lot of people were waiting to see what happened. I won't take us too far into the HHS conversation unless you're ready for it. But just as far as that's concerned, like not knowing what those timelines are going to look like, right? It would be not good if you have a whole lot of people there doing the work and you can't get any of it through the FDA.
Yeah, no, I think that's very a relevant conversation. There are multiple things at play. If you think about just the purely regulatory agency that was impacted by staffing cuts, tariffs,
Mm.
kind of disrupting supply chain to a certain degree. Makes me think back when I was a project manager. I remember getting an email in late night 2019 from a Chinese manufacturer telling me that, well, we're not going to be able to deliver product because we've had some weird outbreak and we're
Ah,
shutting down
pandemic.
indefinitely. Wish I
Yeah.
still had those emails. I think
Yeah.
shutting down indefinitely, I thought my project is toast if this is true.
I gotta tell you, I remember, so I was in manufacturing at that point, and I remember all of the engineers at our facility, not me, but all the engineers laughing and joking and talking about beer because it was called the coronavirus at that point. And so this is not by any means an endorsement, but that was the joke
Yeah.
going around. So yeah, I hear that. It was a different season for sure.
Yeah. And so if there are supply chain disruptions again, whether it's through taxation or other things, that could definitely have an impact on some of those aspects. And as
Yeah.
far as growth, the other side of this that I was
I'm
thinking
jumping in before you
yeah,
go
go
to the
ahead.
other side because I remember so I started at Greenlight a little over 4 years ago. It was mid December 2020. So we were in the pandemic. We had some vaccines. There were people who I worked with at the beginning of my time at Greenlight and customers who completely had to pivot their device because of cost constraints. Like a chip that used to be cents was now astronomically more expensive. And so, yeah, like just that piece with everything that's happening right now, the unknowns of what that supply chain is going to look like could drastically change what companies are developing.
And so to me, when I think about what you're saying, particularly supply chain, I think the best supply chain companies understand this, but with medical device companies, you almost have to think about the traceability from an
Mhm.
economic perspective. All these
Yeah.
parts are going into my medical device. Where are they coming from? How are they going to be impacted? That makes a big difference.
I always say, and if anybody's ever heard me on the podcast, you've heard me laugh about my husband, but he works in sourcing. He's the director of sourcing for a company here in Memphis. It is not a medical device company. And so, yes, I am the quality nerd. Again, if you've probably heard me say this if you've listened to me on the podcast, but I am the one that's like, are they an approved supplier? You can't buy from them if they're not an approved supplier. I think MedTech hears that. I know there are other regulated industries that hear it differently as well. But for us, it's not just as easy as oh, I can't get my part from Amazon, which I won't start my soapbox about why Amazon should not be your approved supplier. But now I've got to find someone different. So it's not just like, oh, I can get it cheaper at this supplier. There's a whole list of requiremements that MedTech has to
Yeah.
manage and
Yeah.
follow.
And I may be getting a little ahead of ourselves too, but if we talk about supply chain, if I skip, because this is kind of towards the end of the report, 11%
Mm.
of the responders on this survey said their current supply chain management program was excellent. So that's okay. That's kind of a
That's good.
tricky. It's a tricky way to word it. Only
It is.
11% said it's excellent. That you could say, well, okay, 89% that said it's there
Said
are
it was
less than some.
bad.
But some are still good. 43% though just called it average. So
Mhm.
that's that's kind of something to think about as you are building out your supply chain processes, consider how that is impacting your company.
And we could spend a lot of time here. I've met a lot of people in what I do who don't understand supply chain, or who may, let me back up, may very well understand supply chain, don't understand what it takes to have a supplier approved or what that does to their timelines. So, like, there are people that I meet with that have done all of their prototyping and everything. They're ready to go. And now we need to build a QMS. That's not the right time to build a QMS, in my opinion, right? We should have already taken some steps. One of those things is suppliers. And so I'm not as surprised by the 80, you could say 89% that are less than excellent, just because I meet a lot of people who just don't have an understanding of what that requires and what it takes and what it means when you say we have to have a approved supplier. And I want to back up. I know the report is more about supply chain management. I hear that as approved suppliers and
Yeah.
making sure we've got the approvals in place to be able to meet the demands that we need.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about the medical device industry. Every leader in the medical device industry that I talk to about, one of the questions I nearly always ask is, what do you think sets apart the medical device industry from
From
every other
others.
industry? And they always tell me the regulation. It's so you think about
What do you
supply
mean
chain.
by that?
Well, yeah, and you could go, okay, upstream of that, really, what are we talking about? It's the safety, patient
Yeah.
safety, and there's the regulation that makes It sort of enforces that.
Yeah.
But that applies and it has downstream effects to everything. Supply chain management. Now you have a specific way of doing it. Marketing, you have a specific way to do ad promo
Mhm.
and so on.
That you
So
have to follow, right?
yeah,
And for
yeah,
somebody who maybe didn't start in the med device industry and started in an unregulated space, it looks a lot different.
yeah. And if you're interested in learning more about the medical device industry as a newbie, we are doing a podcast episode on that next week. So stay tuned for that one. Okay, let's move on a little bit. But there were a
Yeah.
few other things I thought were interesting. One of them was one of the questions we asked was about their key objectives for the year. So what are you really planning and focusing on? For companies with products on the market, these are commercial companies, one of the most cited priorities was implementing and upgrading quality systems and processes. And this was mentioned by 44% of those with products on the market. Now, we kind of differentiate from commercial medical device companies and those who don't have medical devices on the market yet.
Mhm.
Those pre-commercial companies, they had a different objective. Those are kind of focused on fundraising above all else, closely followed by clinical trials. We'll get to that. But if we talk about this 44 these companies who 44% of the commercial companies mentioned implementing and upgrading quality systems and processes, I know this is something you see every
You know it
day.
is.
What are your talk to me a little
the
bit about this?
the quality nerd in me, the quality nerd in the room who has heard more times than I can count about quality being a non-revenue generating department loves this, right? I love that at least 44% of customers that or not of customers of industry that we surveyed say we're going to upgrade, update some of these because like the bottom line is these are what help bring safe and effective devices to market. And if I think about the patient, right? I'm going back to the boomer parents, they're top of mind, right? There are devices that they are going to be using that closely impact my family. And this is my parents. I've got coworkers and friends that have spouses and children that are more, more directly impacted by devices. So if we and again, I think this goes back to the human part of this. We are all at some point going to use a device of some sort. Preaching to the choir, so they say, because I know Etienne's in that same boat. We want safe products. How do we
Yeah.
get safe products? I know that some see it just as a piece of paper and a procedure that we may or may not follow, but the bottom line is the more that we instill this quality mindset, I call it this quality mindset of like, this is just the way that we operate, right? And less of the tribal knowledge, the better, safer our family members are going to be, or even ourselves, right? I think we all are we don't need it until we actually need it, right? So I love this. I think that a key objective should be upgrading those quality systems and processes. I see that as documenting better procedures as going in, but it's also creating better processes that eliminate errors or identify errors easier.
Yeah, and if we're able to look at a more of a 10,000-foot view of this, if we talk about those who may be reducing headcount or maybe not trying to
Yeah,
scale up, but they are focusing on these other I mean, it they s I'm not gonna say they go hand in hand, but they're complementary
I do.
in that if you have a more streamlined process, it could be less headcount that's needed, I mean, it just depends on the type of product you're building, but
Certainly going to be cost saving from the perspective of recalls, adverse events, things that are preventable by putting some of these things in place. But yeah, I agree with you. If we have better streamlined processes, that could coincide with and I'm certainly not saying like, hey, streamline your processes so you can lay all your people off, right? But if we're fighting to break into an industry or make a difference in an industry, and obviously there are business implications to that, to your point, if we have more streamlined processes, we can do that with potentially less people.
and
How,
there's a
how about
lot of
this? We'll just say this. You don't have, if we are not, I didn't think this through well. If you are not having to investigate CAPAs or document recalls and do those things, there you go. That's less work for less people.
yeah. I when I think of the about a medical device company, I think of it as a lot kind of a three-legged stool. There are 3 things that
Yeah.
have to happen in order for a medical device, and I might have
At the
mentioned this to
same
you before.
time, right? Right? It's
Yeah.
not like at the same time, we can't just have 2 legs. You have mentioned this before, so I'll let you tell everybody else.
Oh, yeah. Well, so medical device, they are specific, and there's other industries. You talk about pharma, biotech, et cetera,
Yeah.
that are similar, but medical device industry, we have to be legal. And I kind of lump that in with the regulatory agency, particularly in the US. I mean,
Yeah.
FDA is a federal agency. So we're talking about legal regulatory processes, but you also have to be ethical. And
Mhm.
that goes back to this patient safety. And you may say, well, if I'm legal, I'm safe, right? Eh, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
And it goes, it's one of our age old things that we've said in the past, compliance versus quality.
I know. Do you see, the picture that just popped into my head, Etienne? It's the toilet paper roll, right? Like it's the toilet paper roll. And for those who haven't seen it, Etienne posted this a long time ago, but it's my kids putting it on top of the, toilet or next to it versus actually putting it on the toilet paper holder, right?
Yeah, we had an empty toilet paper. I remember walking, there was an empty roll, and then they just set it on top of that, and there's a new one. I'm
Yes.
like, well,
So
okay,
that would
compliance,
be
quality.
compliance, right?
Yeah,
Compliance would be, hey, we have toilet paper to take care of our needs. And then the quality piece would be doing it
yeah.
the proceduralized way. I don't know. There are probably people going to argue us on that one, but hopefully the visual rings
Yeah.
true.
And then that third, because I know some people are like, okay, what's the third? The third is profitability. Money
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
air
Too
companies
many.
breathe, and we don't
Yep.
always like to talk about that in the medical
Yep.
device industry, but they have to be
Mhm.
profitable. And so,
I will
yeah,
say on the quality side, I told somebody last week, like the FDA does not care what it costs you to make it. They just don't. They don't care if it's a penny. They don't care if it's $1 million. They are not judging you on
yeah,
that piece. But to your point, it's still a leg of the stool that businesses have to consider because it does matter if it's a penny versus a large amount.
yeah. Okay, but so that's commercial companies. They're
Yeah.
focused on that quality, and that is encouraging to see. Depending on what the motivation is, it's hard to read into that exactly. When we talk about pre-commercial companies that
Mhm.
don't have that medical device on the market yet, and that's in the medical device. I'm curious what your experience is with this. I've worked for companies that you walk in, you feel like you are at a full-blown manufacturing facility, yet they don't have a single product on the market yet, and they've been in business for 10 years. And I, yeah,
I think sometimes when you see those, or from what I've seen, they may have a different industry that they've been serving. And so now they're like, hey, we do all of these things. Let's take this to a different market or a different regulated space, right? So I think of like the additive manufacturers and I think of the wellness industry, like where I've got something that I've been serving as a wellness device and now I actually want to make claims, so I need to pursue this medical device. That's not everybody, but that's what I think of when you talk about those that, look like they've been in business for 10 years and they've never sold a medical device.
right. And that is a probably a large chunk of them. There are some, and one of the things that's interesting to think about is some are purely medical device and just are taking a while to get to market. And I have
Mm.
somewhere, let me see if I can find it, the time it takes to get to market, because I think that's worth mentioning. See if I can find it real quick.
So I have mine pulled up and I'm at an advantage because I can control F in mine.
I have old school
Oh no,
paper.
that's not
Oh,
the right
read like we were.
one.
Yeah. Page 7, I think we
This
talk about the different times it takes to get a class 1, class 2, or class 3 medical device
Yep,
to
there
market.
it is.
All right, what have you got?
3.7 years for class 2 device, 6.6 years for class 3, 4. Let's see. But
And
for
so,
those who have been through the process, that timeline is shorter, 2.7 for a class 2 device and 4.6 for a class 3, 4.
yeah. And that's kind of a long time
Hmm.
waiting to make your first sale. Obviously,
Yeah.
5, 6 years to make a first sale. So this statistic makes a lot of sense when you think about pre-commercial companies focus on that fundraising and clinical investigations.
Yeah.
54% focused on those clinical trials.
Yep.
So different complexity that they're focused on, but still
Hey, the bottom
very
line, they have to be able to raise money to be able to do all the things that they need to do to get a medical device to market. It is not typically a cheap process to get a device to market to prove that, there's viability there and then to do all the verification and validating that needs to happen just from a design and development. I'm speaking more into your wheelhouse and that remark, but just from what I've seen from customers, from companies that I get to work with.
yeah. And there was something I always used to put in my project plans when I was building out a project plan for a medical device timeline, and that was to compile the DHF. And you usually put 3 at least 3 weeks. There are tools now. I mean, Greenlight Guru being one of them that auto compiles that DHF. So now you got to put a different buffer in there, project managers. But there's always something that will potentially slow your project down. And if we kind of move on to the regulatory landscape and some of the different things that we're facing, I do think that we probably have a more complex regulatory environment than we ever had before. But I'd welcome any disagreement. If those of you out there who disagree, I'd love to hear it. Please feel free to find me on LinkedIn, voice your dissent. But what are you thinking, Sarah?
I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a different regulatory landscape based on what we just talked about at the beginning of this call and kind of tiptoed around a little bit. There's just a lot of unknowns right now. And if I it's not all public, so we don't know who is not reviewing at the FDA anymore. I'll say it that way. We just don't know. There's just a lot of unknowns. So when we talk about, I don't know if your question is more directed at a specific thing, but my mind goes to like QMSR. That's projected for February of next year. When I talk to companies right now, it's like, hey, QMSR is coming in February. So I realize ISO 13485 is not top of mind right now. It probably needs to be because of what's coming in February. And then it's kind of met with like, also, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I hope nothing happens with that personally, but I don't know what's going to happen with that. And that's just me as a regular everyday American making that statement, right? And so the point being like there's just a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns in regulatory submissions and what the time frame is going to be for that, if there's going to be anything that we see that changes, or, if
Yeah.
it all operates as we think it is going to, right?
Well, and I'm glad you brought up QMSR. That is one of the things that we mentioned in here. We talked
Yeah.
about companies' level of preparedness for both FDA QMSR and
Yeah.
EUMDR, and to me, they don't seem comparable. They're
Mm-mm.
completely different
Two
animals.
separate things, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, it's worth mentioning. It looks like only 43% of companies that sell products on the U.S. market consider themselves highly prepared for QMSR, as opposed to how many
25%? Is that the
yeah, for EUMDR. So it's
Mhm.
considerably lower, but it surprises me that it's as low as it is, except for when you consider the EUMDR landscape. And it seems medical device companies have a tendency to wait till the last minute when these complexities arise or regulatory changes come up.
I think too, like, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but I'm thinking back in my time in industry, we we moved to a change with ISO 13485. So the new version came out and
2016.
we had
Yeah.
3 years to comply. Except for my company, we didn't have 3 years to comply because notified bodies were certifying to the new version and not the old version. There was a cutoff date, right? You can't certify everybody to the new version on the same date if we're a notified body that kind of shuffles over 3 years, research versus surveillance audits. And so we were kind of like thrust into doing that earlier, right? So if we had answered, I don't know, this survey had happened then and we had answered how we felt in that respect, we would have been super prepared because we were forced to be. No one is really forcing. I mean, yes, it's legal. Yes, February when it goes into effect, we have to comply with it, but it is not.
There's no
No
forcing
one's
function.
no one's being forced early, right? Like the
Yeah.
FDA is not going to knock on your door tomorrow and be like, "Hey, are you ready for this?" Because you got to 11 more months. I can't count. You got 11 more months to get ready for this. I think there's a lot of unknowns there too, of just like how, like, okay, I have a FDA inspector who previously could not look at my management review and my internal audit, and now they can. What's that going to look like? I don't know. And so I think so what that's one side. The other place that my mind goes on QMSR, and I am looking at the phrasing of how we phrase this question, so I don't know if this is super relevant or not, but there are a lot of device companies on the market that are ISO 13485 certified. And so if I am ISO 13485 certified, I am less concerned with how much it is going to take me to become compliant to the QMSR versus if I didn't have that compliance to
Yeah.
the ISO reg, right? Like I
Yeah.
the transition to 2016 for me with ISO 13485 was like, oh, I got to understand this. I got to understand the risk. I got to do all these things because I don't understand. And when I say risk, like all the updates to risk that were included. For me, if I am an ISO 13485 certified company, it feels less like a big jump,
Yeah.
right?
And one of the things that I would say, if there are companies out there who are on the fence trying to decide and say, "Oh, well, EUMDR, but he keeps getting pushed back." Let me just say, the FDA is not going to do
It's
that.
not getting pushed back. I
They're
don't think. I don't
I
think it is.
I cannot imagine, and I'd love to be wrong. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I would love to imagine. Well, I'm just
I
going to
think
say I can't see the FDA saying, "Okay, you guys didn't meet the deadline. We'll push it back a year." That's just not
I
going to happen.
I think barring a global pandemic or, like there
Right.
are some things that I could see
Sure.
push it back that like just because historically we've seen that happen, right? Like so unrelated but related. Etienne, do you have a real ID yet? Because I don't. I got to go get one of those. It's actually going to happen in May, right? Again, unrelated to the med tech, but just from a government perspective, I do think there are some things that could land it getting pushed back, but I don't. I think this is imminent. I'll also add, because it's on my LinkedIn and socials, I have said, I think since I got into the med tech industry, the first day, I don't know, the first week, it was like, yeah, ISO and FDA might come together and this might be a thing. So it was such a long process that for me, I always said it'll happen when pigs fly. I didn't pay attention. I've said that to you on a podcast before. And, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, it was like, hey, actually, I think this thing is going to come to fruition. So we should start paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't don't expect the FDA to just kind of sweep it under the rug for a while or ignore it. It's coming. So
It's law, right?
right. And there's several things like that. There's a couple other things that are just maybe they've kind of flown under the radar, but both the US and the Europe have put different pressures on manufacturers, for example, to provide advance notice of supply chain interruptions. I actually just wrote an article about this or
Mm,
published it maybe a week ago. And just for example, for the FDA, they released that guidance on Section 506J of the FD&C Act, which states that manufacturers have to notify the FDA about potential medical device shortages
mhm.
during public health emergencies, even or in advance of a public health emergency, which still boggles my mind. I mean, this whole thing it blew my mind a little bit on we can make different arguments in favor of or against. You could say, oh, this is government trying to overreach. There's and I tried to be fairly balanced in my article. On the flip side, if we recall the baby formula of 2022,
Gosh.
this was something Stephanie Dixon, a colleague of mine that I used to work with, she reached out and mentioned to me. She said she works in regulatory affairs. She said, if you recall the formula shortage in 2022, FDA took certain actions that help supply chain conduct, for example, like conducting expedited reviews and exercising enforcement discretion for certain infant formula requirements. So I thought that's a good example, and I love that she brought that up. Bring me back. Uh,
I
some of
Man,
this is
though,
good.
my
Yeah,
my brain is going to, yes, but the FDA caused the shortage, right? I mean,
uh,
they didn't. They
yeah,
didn't. It
it's
wasn't their fault. I'm
vicious.
glad they did. Like,
Sure.
yes, I know, I got to be nice, but at the same time, that was part of the issue was
Yeah,
so
yeah.
anyway.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good example.
I've kind of dominated as far as picking things out that I wanted to mention. Were there anything specific you wanted to mention and talk about?
Not specifically. We've done a good job of kind of hopping over what I'm seeing or what I've seen based on the people that I'm meeting with. I'm trying to think if there's anything.
There was a statement I saw on page 6 I really liked. It said medical device companies in the early stages of development need to prepare for complexity. And that
Mm,
seems like a no-brainer, like, oh, of course. Well, what it's sort of getting at, if you and I really encourage you to get the report and actually read about this, but it talks about the issues pre-commercial companies have versus the issues post-company, commercial
they're
companies.
different.
They are
Yeah.
different. And one of the statistics is that pre-commercial companies say they spend 17 hours per month on reactive remediation activities. That number jumps to 52 hours per month with companies who have products on the market. So preparing for that complexity is important. The way I kind of use my layman's terms is I say you got to dig the well before you're thirsty.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's a good analogy for sure.
Another thing that I kind of wanted to mention was going back to the quality management. Operational excellence is going to have to become a guiding principle because only 26% of professionals said that their quality management was highly collaborative, and which indicates that it's primary,
Hello?
what is that? 74% seem to think that it's somewhat siloed,
Mm.
and that's going to have to change.
I mean, I think that's a issue that the med device industry has fought forever. And it goes back to like, I got my own job and I'm going to stick to that. And we don't see all of the cross collaboration where I don't know. I could speculate a lot, but living on the quality side, people don't like quality people, Etienne. I don't know why you like quality people, but it's the rules. It's the reason that in my everyday life I get made fun of by my friends because I like rules. It's a personal problem, right? I like the black, I like the white, I don't like the gray. The gray is hard to live in for me, not for everybody. There are plenty of people who love the gray. But where I'm going with that is like the operational excellence. It was a battle that I fought the entire time I was in the med device industry. There's this tandem of like, we as quality professionals cannot go into the room and say, you have to do X because X is $1 million and we got to make it happen, right? Because there's probably not just one way to do it, right? And to quote you, we've got this three-legged stool that we're trying to balance that the C-suite execs are trying to make sure that we do well, right? I've never seen a stool work real well where one of the legs is longer than the other two, right? Like we need this operational excellence that I see like high performing companies have are that balance of what they do well. Like quality comes into the room, and I'm speaking from my experience, but quality comes in the room and says, hey, we have this problem that we need to solution together, right? Not coming in the room with the solution, but here's this problem, and here are some ways that we think we could meet it. Having that collective conversation is always going to serve us better, right? Than me deciding we're going to put this change to our device in effect, and that's what we're going to do without having the cross collaborational conversations.
I remember a mentor early in my career who told me quality can be a police or they can be a partner, and part of that is up to
Yes.
you. And so, and I'll just give my impression of how FDA puts rules in place because I think sometimes this is helpful because it kind of trickles down to how quality people do their job to an extent as well, and how product development, which is what I consider myself, interact with
Yeah.
product quality. This was helpful for me to understand because sometimes I like cut and dried rules so I know the boundaries to work
Yeah.
in. I do like that. At the same time, the FDA doesn't say go 35 miles an hour around this curve.
You're
And
right.
if those of you who used to drive, I used to ride motorcycles, and if I saw a 35-mile-per-hour curve, I knew I could probably
40?
double that.
Yeah. Oh, double that. Come on, Etienne. The
On a
rule
good day,
follower in
I
me
could
is like
double that. And
40.
there were
Yeah.
times when I missed, and
But everybody
I've read.
has that limit, right?
But my
Everybody
point
has like what that means to them.
But my point is, what the FDA, they don't put that 35-mile-per-hour sign up. What they say is it's a 15-degree curve with a radius of X, and it has a coefficient of friction, and the wind comes out of the southeast at X miles per hour. And you have to understand all of that and say, okay, with the vehicle I'm driving, I can make it this fast. If I'm driving a semi, I'm actually going to go 15 miles an hour. And you have to know what your company is. And I think that is where the true quality professionals shine.
Yeah. This is your mechanical engineer factor of safety, right? Like that's what I hear when you
Okay,
say
yes.
that entirely. That's an inside joke for all of the listeners. But anyway,
brother
going
was
there,
my brother was civil engineer. He said, yeah, I used to work in
charge me
aerospace, and
nuts.
our safety factors were razor thin because of weight distribution,
Mhm.
right? So you really
Yeah,
wanted to be on the money. And
yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
good. I'm glad
I
you brought that up.
the inside joke is because my husband is also a mechanical engineer. Not to bring him back into this, he's gonna love that he's been brought up multiple times. But that it's really funny because I'm like but if we have a factor of safety, people die in the med device industry, so that's not right. But what I wanted to come back to in that is a lot of times when I teach, so I have people who are in the pre-market customers, and they're literally looking at procedures that are with glazed over looks in their eyes. This is the first time, like going back to the like it takes longer when you've never done this before, right? They're like, what on earth does this mean? Do I have to fill in the blank, whatever? And as the rule follower in the room, I like pulling up the QSR as the example in this in right now to say, look, this is what the FDA says. Do you read in there anywhere where it's, and I don't say it, I don't mean for that to sound passive aggressive, but like Do you see this explicitly spelled out? Because it's not there, right? A lot of times that is kind of reassuring for teams that haven't done this before, ones who are quality focused, who do have a desire to do it, I'll just say the right way, or just with a way that has that quality focus, to be able to say, like, oh, there are multiple ways that we could get to the same destination, and we need to live inside of what that says. I challenge, I don't know, maybe we need to ask this next year, Etienne, but like, I don't think there are many people who have actually read what the FDA spells out for. There are lots of quality people and regulatory people who have. So let me just speak them into, because whoever is in that, like, they shouted at the top of their lungs, yes, I have read that. But I think there are a lot of times people who have never done this before that are following blindly, almost, so to speak, where they haven't actually taken a look at what that says,
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
tells them to do.
Well, if we go on to a little bit further in the report, and I think we're close to being able to wrap this up, just those of you
Yeah.
listening. But one of the things I noticed was only there were about 10% of the respondents of our survey that said their company had been issued an FDA Form 483, which I thought was interesting. That was in the last 24 months. I actually have been in a company that was issued a Form 483 multiple, and so it causes a lot of churn and swirling in the company. What's what I think is, I don't know if this is reassuring or exactly what to call it, but I wrote an article a few years ago on what the top 3 reasons for 483s
Yeah.
were, and for several years, and my guess is it's still the same, and it's CAPA, design controls, and complaints.
Yep.
If you're
You're
building out
right.
your quality management system, those are the 3 things you just focus on, nail those, and
Yeah.
not that you can't get a 43 for something else, but yeah.
I tell everybody, like, have a process established, right? Because, okay, so I'll back up. There, all that data is available. Well, I assume it's still available. It was in
Yeah.
December. That's the last time I checked it. There's a huge, for people like Etienne who love data, who want to be able to extrapolate all those things, you can get a lot of data. Hilariously or not hilariously, to prove Etienne's point, you can break that data down by what there's this beautiful little graph that gives you the percentages of what the top 3 or whatever you wanna look at are. You can limit the date range, right, to say, "I wanna look at last year. I wanna look at the year before last." It's the same ones over and over again.
Yep.
And so, yeah, like, I would challenge, if you do those 3, then you probably should do training well, because that's what the FDA is gonna look at next. Like, "Oh, I can't tell you the number of times in audits, not even just FDA inspections, but in every supplier audits, customer audits, all of that. If you don't have a finding and you need a finding, you just go look at training, because you can probably find something low-hanging fruit there." But again, like, I as the I know there are people listening who have sat in more FDA rooms than I have, but I've shared this before. There were 8 FDA inspections in my time that I sat in. The FDA is reasonable. They are not they are there to ensure compliance and patient safety, right? And so if you have an established process that maybe you're not following to the nth degree, right? You can open a non-conformance or whatever that looks like internally in your system. You probably have something that they're called to identify, like, hey, we identify that this was not recorded properly, or we didn't initiate this. Now, if you've never initiated any complaints and you have a procedure, they're still there. That's not going to fly, right? But they're just like, you can do things well and not do them perfect, because we are human. So, like, that added piece to this. Again, like, I would not I would not I would not skip the CAPA complaint and design controls process,
Yeah.
unless you're class 1, and then maybe that looks different for design controls, but
Well, I wanna kinda close out with a statistic and then maybe an action plan. We have an action plan in the report to some of the results or the conclusions that we drew from breaking down some of the data, because those are really good points. One of the things that I thought was interesting is one of the biggest fears, well, when it comes to, well, let's just say purchasing tools for
Mhm.
making all of this easier, simpler, more streamlined, collaborative, all the different things, is that, well, 2 primary things. One is the cost. 69% of companies cited costs, and that's a legitimate fear. If you say, "Okay, well, am I gonna get a tool and it's actually gonna, do something for me?" But then the second one is fears about how long it will take to implement that new solution, and they consider that to be one of the significant challenges. I know you onboard quite a bit.
Mhm.
I don't know if you had any and any things to touch on with when it comes to building out new solutions for your medical
Yeah.
device company?
I so not everybody knows this. I lived in a paper-based world for a very long time, and I helped transition from paper into an electronic quality management system. You and I have talked a lot about like where those live, how they get there, like what the bottom line for me is, and I don't want this to come across as reducing people. A lot of times there are teams that are making do with less because they're not getting the headcount. It's not always about reducing people, it's about not adding people, right? And so if I've got three of us and we are spinning our wheels because we're not efficient, we are chasing down people, we are trying to, I mean, I physically had to,
Yep.
you and I have joked about coffee stains, right? Because I give this document away and I would put post-it notes on it that say, when you sign this, return to Sarah Adams' desk, because it gets lost and people can't, it's like I don't have time to go hunt it down. I've spent too much time in that, but or in explaining that. But what I hear when I see this is don't consider consider the cost of what you're implementing, like the tool that's going to drive efficiency. But more than anything, that is a reduction in the number of people that you're going to need to do the job, right? So you not only become more efficient, but you reduce that I don't know, just what's the right analogy? Like herding cats, it
Oh
seems
man.
right, right? Like going round and round the hamster wheel and doing the same thing, the same process. It's wonderful if you want to like go out and make your processes on the manufacturing floor better and your design control processes better. But if you are still herding cats and not efficient at managing your quality management system, yeah,
Yeah.
the point being there is that cost associated can make it where you do need less people to do the work, or you don't have to go hire. Hey, guess what? Like you don't have to pay for benefits for a software that comes, right? You don't have to pay for time off and things like that. The second piece of this that I heard is how long it takes to implement. And I think that kind of depends on you. It depends on what your team is facing, on how many people you have and what the day-to-day looks like. I love the teams that just come in with a mindset of like, you know what? If we all do this and we do it well for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, we can really get things to a lot better place so that we are more efficient and we do have more time. I, there are people like consultants. There are people that can go in and get that piece done so that you can keep doing your day-to-day responsibility. It's not as simple as putting a key in the ignition and turning it on, right? There are some regulatory things that you have to do to be able to state going to an electronic system, or we're going to use this new software that helps us be quicker. But
And
at the end of the day, oh, God, jump in.
well, I was just gonna say, no, go ahead and finish your thought.
No, at the end of the day, like it, I guess, I don't know, you finish my thought for me. At the end of the day, it's more valuable than it is frustrating,
Well,
right?
the analogy I was thinking of, and before I get into the analogy, I was going to mention if people are interested in hearing what Sarah thinks about a quality management system and can you buy it? Can you build it? She has a great episode on the Global Medical Device podcast called Can You Buy a QMS? And her analogy is with sourdough bread, and I'll leave it at that. Go check out the other
Go listen to the other one.
go listen to it. But the analogy I like to use is I think medical device companies are waking up to the inefficiencies of document management because having lived in paper-based, the analogy I like is computer-aided design and 3D CAD. As
Yeah.
a mechanical engineer, I've used a lot of different types of CAD in my time, and I actually worked at a company where we had 6 different ways of managing our blueprints. We'd have parts come in that I was a refurbishing type engineer. I would evaluate what we had, what could we use, and I would need to go look at the old print. Sometimes I'd look at it at microfilm. Sometimes these were hand drawn,
Oh, wow.
CAD, the impressive things. And those engineers knew their stuff, but they've been outdated. They've been replaced by guys who know 3D CAD. And if you are trying to implement SolidWorks for the first time, it's going to slow you down at first, and everybody's going to be frustrated. But think about it. In the long run, does it make sense to draw things on paper or
Such a
to
good
draw
point.
them in CAD?
In the
That's
day and age that we're living in, right? Yes, I
okay.
feel
Let's
that.
get to this action plan. And I'm just going to skim over this. I
Yeah.
really encourage you all to go check out this report. But the action plan, we talk about reality checking your timeline, and we talk through the different changes in timeline from a class 2, class 3 perspective, and companies that have successfully launched products versus those who don't have any products on the market. I think it's worth looking at that because to me, if I'm owning a company or running a company, what I look at is, okay, that's knowledge.
Mhm.
Knowledge behind this can get me faster.
Mhm.
So something to think about.
Yep.
Secondly, bridge the leadership employee divide. There's a dissonance here between what the leaders think they can accomplish versus what the quality,
Boots on the
regulatory, product
ground.
development people.
Yep. The worker bees, if you will.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's pretty big. So I think that's something worth mentioning. The third thing is you can accelerate that performance with the right technology. And we've already mentioned this, so I'm not going to hit it too much home, but I will say that based on the data we were able to come up with from these 536 companies that use purpose-built medical device quality tools are twice as likely to hit their quality targets compared to those using generic solutions. So that's pretty big. Fourth, it's important that you break down those data silos, and your future performance depends on this. This is incredible to me. Companies that report they are very well equipped to reach quality objectives are 6 times more
6
likely to say
times.
their organization is highly collaborative. Collaboration matters.
I think collaboration matters, and, like, just to add to that, it is a better work environment when there is collaboration and you don't feel siloed, so it's a secondary
And,
part of this.
we talk about collaboration, maybe what it really boils down to is communication. If you
Yeah.
talk about any relationship without communication, it will fail.
And then it really boils down to trust and vulnerability, right? Like, do I trust this person to be able to walk in the room and be like, "This is a bad idea. This is not what we need to do." Right?
All right, moving on. The fifth point in our action plan is to make quality your
You
competitive edge.
you put this in for me, didn't you, Etienne?
Hey, this is a mutually right here. Make
Yeah.
quality your competitive edge. But what are your thoughts? And I want to hear.
I mean, I feel like that's what we've discussed this whole time because I love quality. I think it can be your competitive edge. Like, if not just not just from a efficiency standpoint in the workforce and money and things like that, like, it's your name on the market. Like, how many times have you heard about recalls or
Oh,
um, warning letters, things like that? Like, if that is your brand, that's not a good thing. Gosh, I work in the device industry. I shouldn't say this because then I'll get a bunch of LinkedIn messages. But there are devices that I don't want in me. There are brands that I don't want in me. I don't know if you've heard me tell the story about delivering 2 babies and being like, "And what brand are those stitches?" Like, because
right.
there's just some things that you've seen. So again, I probably have a skewed perspective because I work in the industry. But from quality is a competitive edge, not just in like finances and reducing costs and reducing failures, but also, like, do people actually want your product if you don't have a quality product on the market?
Yeah. And the regulation, if you read the very beginning of 21 CFR Part 820, the purpose of the regulation is to produce safe and effective devices.
Yep.
And the easiest way for me to think about that mattering is to think about it impacting my 6-week-old baby, for example, or whatever else that
The
that may
patient,
be happening. Yeah.
like, directly in your center, in your circle, right?
And so the very last line of this report, I really like this, or of this point at least, is when quality drives your decisions, regulatory requirements become stepping stones rather than roadblocks.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty good way to point it
You
to
just
end
see
this.
things differently, right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Those who've been listening, check out our report. 536 medical device professionals surveyed for our 2025 medical device industry report. Hope you are able to get some benefit from it. And we will see you all next time. Everybody, take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, can I ask a special favor from you? Can you leave us a review on iTunes? I know most of us have never done that before, but if you're listening on the phone, look at the iTunes app, scroll down to the bottom where it says leave a review. It's actually really easy. Same thing with the computer. Just look for that leave a review button. This helps others find us and it lets us know how we're doing. Also, I'd personally love to hear from you on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. I read and respond to every message because hearing your feedback is the only way I'm going to get better. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.